Greetings, welcome to the Metal Book Tavern. Yeah, I changed decorations. So, a few weeks ago I watched a video on YouTube from one of my favorite booktubers, the book Unhaul video, and I thought I also have books that I wouldn't be reading again and that aren't relevant for me anymore. Recently I released a book haul video and this is going to be a book unhaul video. And now let's get started. The very first book that I grabbed is The Iron King by Maurice Duron. This is the very first book in the Accursed King series. Great book, I liked it a lot. But I want a different edition. I heard that the Russian publishing house Azbuka has released the full volumes. I mean that the first book is going to contain the first 3 novels, the second is going to contain 2, and so on. And when I have the chance, I will get these books. And this edition should go to someone else. This is actually a very good story. I recommend reading this. I just want to change the edition. Next book is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I read this book in spring 2019. I read it in 2 days, I liked it, but I'm not going to read this again. Gone Girl, on the other hand, I liked a lot. That one is staying and this one should go. Next one is The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. This is a good read. This was a fun read for a while. I remember the year 2015 when I was reading this book. I flew from Moscow home here to Tbilisi reading this, and it was quite cool. I even reread this in 2018. And I do feel that the young adult genre isn't quite for me. This should go to someone else. The edition is quite good. And the story itself isn't very bad, but I wanna move on from this. Next 2 books are these 2 Sherlock Holmes full volumes, and I regret buying these books. I shouldn't have bought them. First of all, these books are too heavy, and second, they're too thick and the font is quite small. And I don't like the editions, I just like the covers. I bought them in December 2019, back when I thought I would read this in English, back when my English skills were quite weaker than they're now. I saw different editions of Sherlock Holmes and I'd like to get them someday. I can say that I'm changing the editions, yes. Next is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, and I also want to replace this edition. I've had this book since 2007, for more than 15 years. The deal is that this book has a very small font. I don't like this. I want myself a very different copy. Next one is The Flicker Man by Ted Kosmatka. I read this in February 2022 and I like this. It was fun for a while, but then I realized I won't be reading this again. I wanted to get into sci-fi more and I like this edition a lot, but then I realized that this is a very cliché story in some way, and the important themes of free will and destiny and so on were laying on the surface. I wanted depth, I didn't get it. Instead I got cliches and some action and it's just a one-time read and I didn't like it. It isn't something I'm going to read, but if you make a film out of this, it would make a good sci-fi action thriller for one evening. I recently got myself the New Romancer series by William Gibson. I hope this is going to be a good one. And yes, I mean the whole trilogy, not just the first book. So here we have Coraline by Neil Gaiman in Georgian. I have this book in Russian. In Georgian, I'd rather read something else. Nodar Dumbadze, for example. Next one is Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. I said that this was one of the best books of 2022, but now I realized I rushed with it. I remember really nothing from this book. And I'm not going to read this. This isn't my thing, not for me. Not interested in reading this, although I liked it more than some of Palanik's other books like Doomed and Lullaby. I don't even remember Lullaby. Doomed was quite good, and this one was also good, but not my thing. This is going to drive a lot of Sir Terry Pratchett fans crazy, but guards. I read this in spring 2021 and I didn't get this book. I also had Equal Rights from him and I loved that one. I liked it a lot. This one, well, I didn't quite get it. Not for me. Next one is Man for Himself by Erich Fromm. I read this in 2 or 4 days in August 2020. I liked it back then, but I don't remember anything anymore, and I'm not reading this again. If I want something philosophical, I'll be reading something else. But this one, I'm going to say goodbye to. And the next one is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, which is quite ironic because this is the very first book that by Neil Gaiman that I read, and before I read this book I thought, oh, Neil Gaiman is the author I'm definitely going to like. This is what happened, but not this one. In this edition I also have The Graveyard Book and American Gods, and those are staying, well, at least until I get different editions. But this one goes. I'm not reading this again. I remember nothing from it. If I want to go back to Neil Gaiman, I'll read Coraline or Graveyard Book or American Gods. At the moment I'm reading again Good Omens, his work with Sir Terry Pratchett. Amazing book. I think it's a candidate for one of my all-time favorites. Next one is Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, the edition with only the first 4 books, starting with The Magician's Nephew and ending with Prince Caspian. Yes, the inner chronological order. I'm giving this away because I have a full volume edition where are all 7 books. Oh, speaking of Narnia, I have a video on my channel, Why It's Worth Reading. I recommend checking that out. I kind of feel sad about giving this book away because the edition is very good, but I failed to find the edition with the other 3 novels, and I found it after I bought the full volume, and I also need space on my bookshelf, so this one has to go. Now the next one is Wuthering Heights by Emmeline Bronte. I've had this book for nearly 10 years. Since autumn 2013. Wow, time flies. When I got back into reading, that year, 2013, this was one of the first books that I bought and I read it in one day, but I am not reading this one again. Yes, classics you'd say, yes, I agree, but I don't want to read this again, and I don't like what happens in this book because I remember it made me so angry and I don't want to feel angry anymore while reading books. I'd like to read books that make me angry in a good way, but this one made me angry in a bad way. I have The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde in this edition, and I'm keeping that one. I'd like to read this year. 10 years. I remember I read this book 10 years ago. This was one of the first books that I read and I don't want to keep it anymore. So next one is The Causal Vacancy by J.K. Rowling. I remember when this book came out in 2012 or 13. I read this book in 2 days, I remember, in online format, and a few years later I got myself this book. I don't want to keep this anymore because this isn't the story that I would love to own. This isn't what I'd love to read again, and the only reason that I keep this on my bookshelf is because of the author. Now I realize that well, that's not something for me. She tried to be mature, adult, and you can add the so-called adult content into your book and it won't be a mature book, because mature books, they deal with deeper themes than simply drinking and smoking and blah blah blah. You got the point. And even if you decide to add this adult content, you have to be careful with how you write it. Now the next book is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. I always knew that this book would live eventually. I read this in summer 2022. Sure, I thought it was decent, but then I realized that this isn't something I want to keep on my bookshelf. I didn't enjoy it enough. And I also didn't like how the author was moralizing towards, around here. I didn't like the moralizing. I didn't like what topic he was moralizing on. And this book is also the case of what I like to call poisonous escapism. On its own, escapism is a good thing. In this book, however, it seems very poisonous. And then the author goes completely moralizing, and I didn't like that. And I love escapist themes, just not how it was portrayed here. Next one is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury in Georgian. I have the Russian edition, but this edition is quite cool, actually. I like it. This is a book I do call a must-read, and I don't like the label must-read. Next book is The Dirt by Motley Crue and Neil Strauss. You know what, I'm in for rock and metal biographies, and I said multiple times on my channel that I like reading about this rock and roll lifestyle. But first of all, I don't listen to Motley Crue at all. Not my thing. I don't like glam metal, I don't listen to that. And importantly, these people are the worst. They are worst of the worst. These are most obnoxious and insufferable rock stars I've ever read about. These guys went way too far. I was kinda disgusted. I don't want to go back to Motley Crue ever again. If I happen to come across a song I like and then it turns out to be Motley Crue, I wouldn't say no to it, but I want nothing to do with Motley Crue ever again. Maybe I will watch The Dirt. I know that this book eventually became a film, but no. Motley Crue have to go. Next book is Beyond the Wall, explaining George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. This is a collection of essays by different authors. They observe A Song of Ice and Fire. I bought this while I was still a die-hard A Song of Ice and Fire fan. While I like this book, it was fun to read. It's an easy read. It's very interesting too, but they're very interesting topics. I don't want to keep this anymore, and I need some free space on my bookshelves for future books. And this was a fun read. Very good ideas and themes. I think you can find these online. Next three books are the Gravity Falls graphic novels. In summer 2022, I went through a huge reading slump. I couldn't read anything. I hardly read anything, but then I remembered that I had these graphic novels and I read them, and they were one of those books that got me out of the reading slump, and I liked them. But then I also realized that these graphic novels, they repeat the TV show, and I decided that if I decide to go back to that story, if I want to check out Gravity Falls again, I'd watch the TV show instead of reading these. This is definitely good graphic novels. This is something you can definitely gift to a child, but if you want to experience the story, I'd still recommend watching the TV show instead of reading these. And finally, the last two books are both John Green books, An Abundance of Catherines and Paper Towns. An Abundance of Catherines was the first John Green book I read. This is I can say that this book is quite underrated among the John Green books. Paper Towns was actually quite a great book. I read it a lot in 2015, and that was also the year the film came out. I watched it and it was quite okay, but the book was better, obviously. These editions are very good. I also owned Will Grayson by John Green and this other author, David, I can't pronounce his last name. I took that book from my cousin. He bought it at the age of 11, and since the book was in English, he didn't know what it was about, and I saw that book and I was like, I need this. I read it in English. Yeah, I was like, it's okay, but then I gave it away. And I'm also giving away these John Green books. Well, surprisingly, I did read young adult in 2015 a lot. The Maze Runner, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and the John Green books. I'm keeping The Maze Runner and Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, but The Perks of Being a Wallflower and these two are definitely going. I do feel that it's time to leave these books behind. I just need free space and I don't want nostalgia to come in my way. Anyway, that's all. These are all the books that I'm unhauling. In the Russian language version of this video, I showed a few more books. I showed The Kafka's Calling by Robert Galbraith and a collection of short stories by Arthur Clarke, but eventually I decided to keep them. Anyway, that's all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. What are the books that you are unhauling? Let me know that in the comments. See you next time. Goodbye.